Hello Year 10 and welcome to the third walking talking mark, and this one is focused around doing paper 1 question 3. Now remember that for paper 1 question 3 it's really important that you're thinking about the whole structure of the text. I'm not going to read the text again because we've already read it once and kind of already know a tiny bit of what's happening to it in it, sorry. But one of the things that we are going to look at is how you go about planning the question 3. Remember, this might be one of the ones that you want to leave last. A few pupils tend to is only A marks compared to question 4, and so is you might decide that is the last one. And there are ways that you can quite quickly be hitting marks for this paper for the question. Now, one of the things that I tend to like to do for this question is really, as it is to do with the whole source, and I'm looking at the whole source, I always plan in terms. I'm quite visual. I'm quite visual with this source or with this question, sorry. I tend to think about it that I want to do it in quite a visual kind of way. Now, the first thing that I do is I draw 3 squares actually. And what those 3 squares tend to, sorry if you can hear my dog, and what those 3 squares tend to focus on is this idea that you've got the beginning of the source, the middle of the source, and the end of the source. And you are looking to see what is happening in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end, and how those sections of the text are connected. Because whatever's happening at the beginning is connected with the end, and whatever's happening at the end is meant to be connected with the beginning, and also the same with the beginning and the middle, and so forth. It's about looking at these connections. So one of the phrases that I like to put actually in these arrows is this one. I'm going to put it in purple so let's see if you can see it. This links to. So you want to be making like a real clear connection that the beginning links to the end by this. So it might be because it's similar, it might be because it's contrasting, or that the end is linking back to the beginning because it reminds us of something else. That is what structure is about. What is happening when and why it's happening then, in terms of in the sections of the text. So the way that I like to rewrite this question, so it's a bit more clear and it's a bit more, it can help you actually write your answers in a bit more in a clear way, is I like to rewrite the question like this. So what happens when? What happens when? Okay. So what happens when, and then why does it happen then? And you want to be thinking actually a lot about the literature text that you've been reading. Like, for example, why does Dickens introduce Scrooge in such a mean way? Well, what happens when, in the beginning, Dickens introduces Scrooge in such a mean way? Why does it happen then? Because he wants to contrast that to the end so that we can see his miraculous change, and that kind of fills us with hope that people can change and become better people. So you look at the way that you can link the beginning with the end. So asking these 2 questions is really important. So what happens when? Okay, so that is, let me just get proper highlighted there. So what happens when, and why does it happen then? Like, that is important. Now, when we're looking at the source with the tenant of Wildfell Hall, one of the things that I also think that you should always, like, we're going to look at what's happening in the beginning, the middle, and the end, but also think about how has the source been structured overall. So I tend to write here, overall structure. So is there a non-chronological structure? Is there a cyclical structure? Is there a chronological structure? So I tend to try and see, like, what's the overall way that the text has been written, and I tend to actually start my answer with that, because what that then does, it means I am looking at the whole text and I'm trying to evaluate the whole text. And so just by writing a few sentences, I can quite quickly get to the top of that level 2, so a 4 kind of 8 out of 8 mark. Now, this text in particular is written, the tenant of Wildfell Hall is written in chronological order. There are no flashbacks, it's not going to the past, it's literally the main character describing Wildfell Hall. Near the top of Wildfell Hall, he's describing that. Then he's walking towards the hall. then he is by the garden, then he meets a boy by the wall, and then the mum comes out, Mrs. Graham, over here and tells them off. So literally the source is overall written in chronological order. Chronological order. So I'm getting that ready because that is, oh, my PC is about to die. I'm getting that ready because that is really important in actually understanding how is the writer creating. So we look back at the question, okay? So we look back at the question, that idea of building a sense of curiosity and suspense. It's actually the chronological order that helps create that sense of curiosity, because things are being revealed to the reader at the same time that they're being revealed actually to the narrator of the piece. Now, when we look at the beginning of the source, I would say that a lot of the beginning of the source, okay, is focused on actually describing Wildfell Hall. Now, I'm going to draw here a hall, which is literally going to be a house, okay? And one of the reasons he's describing Wildfell Hall, and we've got our narrator here, okay, and I'm just going to draw a tree that looks a bit skeletal. Okay, you might think that you can draw it better, but like in terms of overall it's a chronological order, but in terms of structure, this is the beginning of our story. And actually what the writer's doing at the beginning of the story is introducing the setting, okay, and then the setting is the actual hall equals the hall. Now, why is the writer doing this? So like what happens when, so in the beginning, the writer's introducing the setting, the hall. So why does it do that then? So the writer's doing this, well, the hall is very empty and the hall is very isolated. So it might be actually to create a sense of isolation and emphasize that the hall is actually really empty. Okay, so they're trying to create that sense of isolation and that the hall is actually empty. So they're trying to emphasize that a lot. Now, in the middle of the source, so I will go about here, when the man is by the wall of the garden, so I'm going to put the wall here. Okay, so still I've got my man, okay, and we encounter, he meets the little boy that almost, I'm just going to give him curly hair like this, that almost fall off the tree. Now, that is important because in the beginning, we've had this really empty hall. In the middle, it is revealed that there is someone else, or that we know that there's some new people living there, but we get to meet one of these new inhabitants. Now, the shocking thing is that it is actually a boy. And that creates a sense of curiosity and suspense, because when we think of a boy, we think of somebody that is vulnerable, and they could be in danger. And actually, and you got this man that's approaching. So the fact that the hall is isolated and then in the middle we get introduced to this little boy, then that again creates a sense of curiosity and suspense. So I might say that in the beginning is the introduction of the setting, and in the middle is the introduction or change of focus to a new character. So look at the way that I'm moving. So in the beginning, the writer's doing this. In the middle, you've got this. And why is he doing this? To emphasize that this child may be vulnerable, that may be in danger. And actually, I think the child contrasts with what we know about a narrator. A narrator has been killing or hunting. So the child is innocent while the narrator has got this experience. So it's to create, I suppose, a bit of a contrast. And then at the end of the source, not only do we have now the child, but you've also got the appearance of the sudden appearance of Mrs. Graham, okay? And she takes the child. So here at the end, again, so we've got this change of focus to a new character, okay? Now, if you think about it, like two characters being introduced at the same time, that can make it feel quite overwhelming. It can make it feel like that there's a lot of suspense. But in particular, what I like about the beginning and the end is that you've got this really contrast between isolated, empty, and loneliness, contrasting with the fact that there are people living in the house, and that is really lovely. Now, the other bit that you may have noticed is the way that new characters are introduced. So like, for example, the boy is introduced with a slight rustling, and then the Mrs. Graham is introduced with a rustling of female garments. So one of the things that the writer keeps on doing is she introduces the characters through sound before we see them physically, and that again creates a sense of curiosity and suspense. So remember that for this question, you want to make sure that you're answering these questions. So what happens when, and why does it happen then? So you have to use phrases like, in the beginning, this happens. It happens because this is the reason. In the middle, this happens, and it happens because this is the reason. Now, if you can make links, you say this happens because of this reason, and this links back to the beginning or links to the middle, that is the kind of thing that gets you into that band 3, band 4. Okay, your teacher's now going to stop the video, and you are going to have 15 minutes to write your own response to this question. Okay, so I'm going to now go through a sample answer for this question. Can I be honest? I've written like 3 different ways that I would answer this one, and I'm going to go for the one that builds up kind of up to that level 4. And I'm going to tell you where you start hitting level 3 and how quickly you are hitting level 2. Okay, so that 3 out of 4 into that 5 out of 6, and then that 7 and that 8. Now, it's quite a bit of a long response, but do make sure that you're copying it and you're taking it down, because this is what is going to help you for your revision. This is literally like the phrases that you need to look at, and this will help you with your revision in general. So we're going to start with, like I said, I like starting, because sometimes it works really well, starting with talking about the overall structure. What that will do, actually, if I'm specific enough and I give some details, it will help me get a 3 or a 4 out of 8. Quite quickly, I can be on that 3 or 4 out of 8. Bearing in mind, the average mark for year 11s on this question across the UK in the summer tends to be around 3. So if you're hitting a 4, you are in like a really, really good place. So the way that I start this answer is I do the following. So the writer, so I'm going to get it closer so you can see it. So the writer, and I like writing this phrase. So the writer structures the extract in a chronological, okay, that's what I'm going to focus on, order. So like this is like the what happens when, so in chronological order, and I'm going to say how. So chronological order by, so what does he do? By focusing on Wildfell Hall at the start, and by focusing on the encounter with Mrs. Graham. Oh, sorry, guys. My dog has just drank water too quickly. With Mrs. Graham at the end. Okay, now at the moment I'm actually on maybe 1 or 2 marks. I've given evidence. I said what I'm focusing on in the beginning and what I'm focusing at the end. I'm being specific as well. Okay, and then I've got the word chronological order there, so I'm literally winning. So at the moment I would say that my answer is probably on a 2 out of 8, just by writing that on its own. However, of course, I want to get higher than that, and this is where it's not just because you write an extra sentence it's going to give you into a 3 out of 8, it's actually what you write. And the next bit is the kind of thing that makes me give a 3 or even a 4 out of 8 to a pupil. I probably will say a 3 just because it's so short. So what I'm going to say is this structure mirrors the narrator's physical journey. So why has the writer done this chronological order? Because they want to show that this is the way that the narrator's actually moving to the house. So the physical journey to the house. Okay, so this is so imagine you left question 3 last. Okay, imagine you left question 3 last and you end up writing this. This might now push you into like kind of that 3 out of 8, just that. And it's, guys, you can't just do it by saying the writer's structure in the extract in chronological order. The only reason why it will make it into that 3 out of 8 is because I'm being specific. I'm mentioning that they talk about Wildfell Hall, then I'm saying that encounter with Mrs. Graham at the end, and then I'm talking about the narrator's physical journey to the house. It shows that I've read the source and that I know what is happening in the source. Okay? Now, I'm going to do one really good paragraph in terms of focusing on the extract. Okay, so let's start. And I like, so if I've done the overall, then I start with in the beginning. So in the beginning. Okay, beginning. Can't spell beginning today. Now remember, this is my what happens when. Okay, what happens when. And why does it happen then? So what happens when? In the beginning. So what's happening in the beginning? In the beginning, the writer introduces introduces the setting of the isolated and mysterious Wildfell Hall. Okay, so look, I'm talking about the setting, but I'm saying what that setting is, and I said in the beginning. So what happens when? Now I'm kind of I do need to give a tiny bit of evidence. So the writer, and now because this is the beginning, I'm gonna use the word initially. The writer initially describes the hall being near desolate fields. The writer being desolate fields. So look, I've talked about the isolated and mysterious Wildfell Hall, and I've given evidence that suggests that. Now, what you do not do now is you do not zoom in on a word. Okay, we do not zoom in on a word. We do not need to zoom in on language for this question whatsoever. Okay, we are focusing on analyzing the structure. So I'm going to answer my next question. Why does it happen then? So I'm going to say the writer does this. So why does the writer do this? The writer does this. Okay, so the writer's doing this to create an ominous sorry, it just didn't look right. Ominous, to create an ominous and eerie atmosphere but also to, so why is it doing this? But also to emphasize how empty and remote. Now, remote is another word for isolated, and I don't want to use the word isolated again. So how empty and remote the hall is. This sense of isolation, so I'm linking it back to the question, isolation creates suspense. Well, why does it create suspense? Because the reader is interested to find out why the narrator is so interested in the place. So it creates a bit of suspense because like he knows that this house is empty, really, or it has been empty. He knows that there might be new people, but why is he so interested in going there? So I've done this, like I've done the beginning. Now look, I literally use this phrase to now link it to the end. At the moment, I'm probably on a 3, I would say actually a 4 out of 8. Okay, I've only talked about the beginning and what's happening in the beginning. I've got my evidence and I've talked about the effects. And we'll say maybe a 3, 4 out of 8. Sometimes I might give you a 3, sometimes a 4. Now, what I'm going to do next is the thing that's going to push you into that 5 out of 8. I'm linking the beginning to the end, and then I'm linking it back again. So I'm going to use this phrase, and you want to remember, so this links to, okay, so this links to the end where the sense of isolation is contrasted as 2 characters are introduced. Okay, and then I'm going to list, and then I'm going to list those 2 characters. So this links to the end where the sense of isolation is contrasted as 2 characters are introduced. The boy and Mrs. Graham. Full stop. In the end, the writer changes focus to Mrs. Graham's dramatic and sudden entrance. Okay, so look, I'm focusing on what's happening at the end. I've mentioned it, but I'm developing that a tiny bit. Dramatic entrance, creating. So why has he done that? To create. So creating an element of surprise and intensity. Now look what I'm going to do here, because this is the bit that shows a real understanding of structure. So I'm going to link it back to the beginning. This links to the start as although the house seemed abandoned and lifeless, it is clear it is occupied. The contrast between the still atmosphere in the start and the emotional reaction at the end. So look at that, like constantly linking the beginning and the end. So the contrast between the still atmosphere in the start and the emotional reaction at the end makes the reader curious as to what could be hiding in what could be hiding in the mansion. Okay, so this is the kind of answer that probably around here we're on the 5, 6 out of 8. And the reason why we're there is because we have this constant link between, so I've said it twice, so this links to the end, so I'm linking it between the sections, and then again I've done at the end the contrast between the still atmosphere in the start and the emotional reaction at the end. This constant linking and then explaining why you think is creating that atmosphere is the kind of thing that gets you that top towards those top marks for question 3. Okay, now to get onto that 4 out of 8, the kind of thing that you might be looking at is like maybe talking about the contrast or that development of that motif of the use of the sound, the slight rustling in the middle, and then linking it to the end to the way that the character Mrs. Graham is also being introduced. Like I said, I've written 2 answers for this. Now I've written an 8 out of 8 answer. However, the 8 out of 8 answer doesn't follow as clear a structure, and I think this is a much better example to help you revise in terms of what you have to do for this question. You need to remember that for this question, you want to be answering, oh sorry, I put the other question there. You want to be answering the what happens when and why does it happen then. That is just really, really, really important. Okay? All right, I hope you find this helpful, and we're going to go now to question 4.